Say what?
Hello, happy June. Welcome back to Say What, where we hear from those connected to the industry and more about our world of electrical apprenticeship. And this, of course, includes the topics that you're sending us via email, so keep them coming. I'm your host, Cindy Sandifer. And today, I want to look at this idea that construction workers are considered at a higher risk of suicide. We're seeing a rise in addiction and mental health illness. And it's really making this a top priority, something we need to be aware of. We want to make sure we have the proper resources in place, industry-wide, right? Because it's impacting all of us in much greater ways than I think we've ever at least acknowledged before. So today, Dr. Charles is back. He's been with us on the podcast. He joined us at NTI in 2023. And today he's going to talk with us more about dealing with stress, anxiety, and depression and how we can support each other. Dr. Charles, thank you so much for coming back to us. I've already told the listeners, but you were with us last year for a podcast episode in 2023. Then you came to NTI and spoke with our C group about resilience. And I think I've already told you, right, that you're definitely coming back to NTI this year. Okay. So we enjoy having you. We enjoy what you bring to our industry. Mental health awareness has become hyper-focused in the right ways for us. I think there's this realization that of all the things we teach, of all the things we need to know, if we're not looking at this, we're always going to be missing something. And last year, I remember we talked about suicide rates and stress in the industry. And I'm telling you, just in the past 4 weeks, I feel like I've talked to a few people, at least a good 5 or 6 people, different scenarios, dealing with apprentices, contractors, instructors. It's all across the board, training directors, dealing with various situations that are heavy, whether it's that they're helping someone else and trying to be a support and sometimes feeling just completely unsure of what to do, or they themselves are dealing with something. So again, this is just people stuff. And so it doesn't matter what industry you're in. It doesn't matter your role. We're dealing with this. And so kind of wanted to have you back just as this topic continues to be, a major, again, focus in our efforts in what we're trying to do in our industry. And so I thought today, we talked last year, again, kind of some general things, but looking at, you and I discussed this idea that we all get sad. And yes, like meaning sad as what we think of as being sad, but this idea that a lot of times we don't know how to pinpoint like what's causing this, what's triggering it, short of an obvious life event. Like obviously there are things that could happen that we would know what's causing it. But in thinking of sad, we're looking at stress, anxiety, depression, which I think are 3 terms that we're all familiar with. But is it possible to somewhat at least break down the differences between stress, anxiety, and depression as we as individuals are dealing with these various feelings?
Yeah. Well, SAD is that's a good acronym. It works very well. But so all 3 of them are emotional states, and there are levels to each one of them. Stress is an emotional state of worry or mental tension. It's caused by perceived difficult situations, or how you look at a difficult situation. It's really a natural human response to things that are challenging to us, things that are difficult in life. It's kind of a natural response to that. Stuff that threatens to shake us up, to shake our world. Everybody experiences stress to some degree. It becomes a problem when it's handled incorrectly. The brain's reaction, within the fight or flight or even freeze mode is associated with stress. What we run into, it determines what we're going to do with it right away, instantly. But whatever the stressor happens to be, once the immediate threat is past, whatever that stressor is, once the immediate threat is past, it should move into the prefrontal cortex of the brain and leave the amygdala where the fight and flight and freeze stuff is taking place. Once that's gone, we need to get it to the prefrontal cortex in order that it can be evaluated, it can be judged, and it can be prepared for. And now that's related to what we've come to know as emotional intelligence. That's Goleman's ideas, that when we get to that place, then we can better deal with whatever's going on. That's when the wise mind takes over and you think, well, it's not what happens in life, it's how I take it. Anxiety is an emotion that's characterized by an unpleasant state of mind. Basically, you experience fear, you experience dread, your body gets in on the act and gets involved and starts sweating. You may get dry mouth, your hands shake, you may begin to stutter. Anxiety is an emotional overreaction to stress. That's when your body gets in on it. It is really closely aligned with negative or bad stress. Every stressor that comes along does not have to cause us to feel bad stress. It doesn't have to. It's not what happens in life, but it's how we take it. There's a guy whose name was Hans Selye, and I think it was around 1974, and he came up with this concept of eustress. And that means that some stressors cause bad stress in some people, but it causes good stress in other people. You know, the prospect of me getting up out of my chair and running a mile, they'll tell you right now, that might produce some bad stress for me. But there are some people who experience what's called a runner's high, just thinking about running a mile. I mean, they do it all the time, and it feels good to them. And that's their life. One is de-stress, or you're in distress, and the other is eustress, which is good. When stress is not handled well, it becomes anxiety. And then it goes through this kind of a cycle of anxiety that I could go through it now. I can give you a chance to talk if you want to, or I can go through it later. But I'm going to jump down and actually talk about depression, and then I can come back to that possibly. Okay. The cycle of anxiety, because that's really important in understanding how to deal with anxiety. But depression is complicated. You know, it's very complicated, so complicated that we really don't understand it today completely. There's mild depression, which affects about 20+% of the population. And then there's major depression, affecting about 8.5% yearly. And then there's severe depression, affecting just under 7% of our population. Depression affects how you feel and how you act. And unfortunately, those who deal with depression are way too often considered to be weak. We'll see somebody dealing with depression and we'll think, well, they're a weak person. They just can't handle things. And that is an untrue stereotype that we should never consider. To outsiders and even to people dealing with stress themselves or dealing with depression themselves, it looks and feels like a series of poor decisions. That's what it appears to be like for onlookers. It looks like they're just making poor decisions. It looks like a bunch of bad choices. And that's how ignorant we are when it comes to depression. People try to help people by telling them, oh, you're just being lazy, or why in the world you're sleeping all day? What you need to do is just shake it off. Stuff like that is spoken to people who are literally feeling serious depression. What you've been mad about, you've been missing out on everything. And now the symptoms will include sadness and hopelessness and anxiousness, of course, and loss of interest in things that you once enjoyed, a lack of energy, eating more or eating less, than you normally would eat, having trouble concentrating on things. It's triggered by one thing or by a combination within these three things, and that is hormones, which are called neurotransmitters. They get out of whack. Environment, which is, you understand, can relate to being in poverty. It can relate to job stress. It can relate to family stress, financial stress. And the other one, the third one, is genetics. And believe it or not, genetics sometimes plays a role, sometimes it doesn't. So it's not true that if it's in your family, you're going to have it, or if it's not in your family, you're not going to have it. Neither one of those is true. For your symptoms to be considered depression, you need to have them most of the day and almost every day for a period of at least a week. And they should not have any medical cause. Something like a thyroid can cause you to feel a mood change, but that's not depression. The important thing is, one of the other important things is that when people are depressed, there are things that we just really need to take into consideration, and I'll talk about those in a few minutes.
Yeah, I was taking notes. It's interesting because it feels like, and it's not, and I recognize that, but it almost feels like a cycle. Like there's stress, and then if it's mishandled, it becomes anxiety. At least those two have some connection, right? Depression doesn't necessarily, because, as you pointed out, there could be genetic factors, there could be hormonal, which aren't necessarily stress or anxiety, but I'm thinking there could be, right? Am I right in thinking you could have stress that leads to anxiety that then leads to depression?
Absolutely right. The stress and anxiety are directly associated with each other. And as you said, depression can come for other reasons, but I'm certain that many times it's connected with mishandled stress leading to anxiety, leading to depression.
Right. And I do want to get into, because you mentioned two things. One was more on depression, and then also the cycle of anxiety, which I think both we need to do. I do have a question though. Do you think that that we're uncomfortable with the symptoms of depression? Like we don't know how to deal with it. So that's why we go to this, meaning the person that's not depressed, right? That they're dealing with someone who is, and it's like, oh, shake it off and, come on, get out of bed. Like because we don't feel like we know what to do with it. Is it more discomfort, or no, maybe not?
Well, I don't know that I would go so far as to say it's more of discomfort. I'm certain that some of it is discomfort. I think it's ignorance.
Okay. That's fair. Right.
If I were to weigh one against the other, I think I would weigh ignorance a little more higher than discomfort. But I think you're right. It's probably largely associated with both of those.
Yeah. And ignorance, I know I'm just saying this for the sake of listeners, because I'm pretty sure you're using the true definition, because I think we throw the word ignorant out sometimes as insult. No, I just want to, I love it because I want to clarify. Ignorance is not knowing.
No, I am not at all being derogatory. I'm just saying we don't know.
That's it. Right. So much of it.
We don't know.
Okay, so I'm debating. I guess let's stick with depression for a minute, because you said there was some more, like something, I believe I understood you to say, like there's more to that, or should we go back to anxiety first?
Yeah, let's go to anxiety.
Okay. Let's get me anxious. Make me anxious real quick. Thanks.
Yeah. I'll simply say it's a thing called the anxiety cycle. And of course, like any cycle, there are stages. And the first stage of this anxiety cycle obviously starts with the anxiety itself. And that is being nervous or uncomfortable, heart racing, fearful, uncontrollable thoughts related to some stressor that was not handled well in the first place. And then the second stage is avoidance. And that's what people become comfortable with, avoidance. Now, and the truth is, there's a branch of psychology and therapy that tells you we need to avoid certain things. So all avoidance is not bad, but this second stage of avoidance relative to anxiety, you just you get away from it, and not necessarily in a good way, but you get away from it. You get away from whatever it is that you're afraid of, or that you're anxious about, and you do it physically and or emotionally. You can have anxiety about being fired from work and choose to avoid it by not going to work on that day, but and then emotionally, you can experience anxiety when you're in a crowd, maybe at a party or something like that, but you can drink enough alcohol until you feel nothing emotionally. That's emotional avoidance. And there are a number of things that fit in that. Right. But the avoidance, made you feel good short term. Yeah. But it's short-lived, and it always comes with costs. It always comes with consequences. And you will have, not only that, but you will have trained your brain to keep avoiding stuff that would make you feel bad, because avoiding it will make you feel good. And you literally train your brain. You train your brain to avoid it because it feels good to avoid it. People who do that usually go to their grave with their music still in them because they're avoiding difficult situations, and those difficult situations could possibly cause them to become or do things that they never would do at all. And a number of people, because of anxiety, will avoid stuff because they're afraid it's difficult. It's not going to feel good. Right. Stuff that could promote them. I had a client who missed trips to Europe with his family. Missed a couple of trips to Europe with his family because he had crippling anxiety. He hated to be in crowds. Any crowd, he hated it. He wouldn't even go to the grocery store. And certainly a flight was certainly out of the question. Yeah. And after about 3 weeks, we worked on, the things that he needed to do. And after about 3 weeks, he went to the grocery store. After about 6 weeks, he told me he had bought tickets to Norway. And about a month after that, he was showing me pictures of him and his family having a ball in Norway.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh.
So anxiety can rob you, but it's really not that difficult of a thing to overcome. If you really understand how to limited small exposures is basically how you treat it. With him, I did some hypnotherapy, and I helped him to replace all of those frightening concerns that he had with positive ones and good concerns, and he responded well to it.
So, okay. Like I'm like, ooh, we need to write down a list of topics for you and I to work on for me. Let me ask you, you mentioned avoidance. You mentioned like someone that say would use alcohol maybe as a way to, kind of just avoid and not feel anything. Could addiction, could that play into avoidance? Could that be the start of addiction because that's another thing we see in the construction industry, like a really heightened addiction, opioids, and other things as well. So I'm just curious if that plays in.
Absolutely no doubt. Absolutely no doubt. I don't have statistics, but I can certainly guess that addictions would almost have to begin with, in a great percentage, would have to begin with the stressors as well as the anxiety and avoiding discomfortableness and no doubt about that one.
Right. And I would say that could be because, a lot of times with the opioid, at least with the crisis, a lot of things go back to like people were prescribed something for pain. So if you want to use the term, which I wouldn't use it here, but like avoiding pain, right? They're wanting to get rid of pain, and then the addiction may begin from the strength of the medication and also avoiding emotional discomfort, mental discomfort. So just when you were saying that, it really like triggered something for me to think of that.
An absolute connection. Absolutely.
Okay. So the cycle, I want to make sure we don't miss that before we head back into something else. But so it starts with, you're saying kind of like these thoughts, nervousness, uncomfort, and then you start avoiding.
Yeah.
And then, okay.
And then the avoiding and and then once you avoid it, the next thing that happens is you will your brain will decide that this feels good, and then once it decides that it feels good, then you will continue avoiding it, and the more you continue avoiding the anxiety-producing situation, the more anxious you're going to become when you come into those situations.
Right.
And that's pretty much the end of the cycle.
Yeah.
And unless you break that cycle by dealing with it, and the best way I believe to deal with it is through some limited exposure kind of therapy, that you deal with it on a limited basis, a little bit more. I mentioned the grocery store, and then a little, and you build up from there. In most cases, it would be lesser than that, but that's the cycle. That's how you break the cycle.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I could say so much, but I'm not going to, because I've dealt with anxiety, like to the point, and not even knowing what it was, like not recognizing it, and then having that kind of that aha moment, talking to a friend who, as I'm describing some things I'm feeling, she starts telling me her experience, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like I felt like she was describing me, and so then it just really opened up to seek, medication, therapy, all these things that can really help from getting stuck in this cycle, and it's all these things you don't want to talk about because, there's still stigma and, and all the things kind of that you've already said. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So then can we jump back to depression? Cause I'm interested in what you were saying there about.
It's depression is a complicated diagnosis, as I mentioned. You can, there are different levels of it, or different, if you have major, man, I even hate to refer to depression as moderate or mild or those terms, but the one to be concerned with is literally severe, severe, majorly severe depression. That's when that's when you need some medical attention. That's when you really need somebody, a physician, to give you medicine. And also, most physicians are going to give you medicine and tell you, I strongly suggest that you have psychotherapy, because we've known for quite a long time that, meds can do certain things. They can, increase the neurotransmitters is basically what they do. But to really get real help, it needs to be combined with psychotherapy, and that's what works the best. So, but major or severe depression is tough. But medicine and psychotherapy are the ways to treat it.
Yeah, and you've kind of, I'm probably coming back to something else, but what are signs, like, I would guess this is somewhat stress, but if we're saying stress leads to anxiety, which is really the more crippling thing, but what are the signs like that we need to seek assistance, regardless like of what it is we're dealing with? But like, what would be things that should cause us to say, hey, I should probably, see a doctor, see a therapist, like do something about what's going on? Like, is there anything that you would suggest to be aware of?
Yeah. There are signs. There are a number of signs, but most of them have to do with changes. When you think about depression, you want to think about duration and intensity. You want to think about, was this person doing certain things and they're no longer interested in those things? And of course, sleep is a big one. Are they not sleeping at all or sleeping way too much? There are people who are depressed who will sleep 16, 18, 20 hours a day, So those are signs. Not involved with things that they were once excited about doing. And of course, sometimes grief or separation and loss and stuff like that, people will dip into difficult places in their life where they'll be somewhat depressed. So you always have to ask that question: was there an event? And you want to find out if not only was there an event, but how long has this person been feeling this? Again, it's the duration of it and the intensity of it, that you want to try to look at, and before you try to make some kind of judgment as to whether or not it's severe. We all deal with it at some point, but not on the severity level.
That the duration and intensity makes so much sense to me, because as you pointed out, like, we could have life events that happen that cause things, or I think sometimes maybe if you're not feeling well, sometimes it can kind of create this sense of just kind of being down, or if you've got some aches and pains that aren't permanent, but they're there. So when you say that, it's like, okay, how long is this lasting? How intense? To what extent? Are those other things that you mentioned, like sleep or activities and eating and, those types of things that are just making these drastic changes, and they're staying, they're staying at this changed level. I think that's really important to point out, that we're not talking about you have a bad day, or you're just not feeling yourself. Like, it could be something small in that moment, that you're going to bounce back from, but you also don't want to ignore it either. I know people are probably tired of me saying this. I've said it in a few different settings, but I am like this firm believer of finding a counselor, therapist, whatever people want to term it, find that person while things are okay. I mean, I know we always have stuff going on, but like to find that person when you're well or well-ish, because I feel like it's not easy to find the right person. So that can in itself take some time. So to be trying to find someone that you connect with during crisis or tough moments. But I thought, man, if you can find that person, just get connected, get to know them, so that when those times come that you need someone, be it stress, anxiety, depression, whatever, it's more comfortable. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Of course, we don't do well with that proactive stuff, when it comes to us. I don't know. We don't do well with that. We don't, we somehow think that we're going to cause something to happen to us if we think that way. We do it in a number of things. I want to try to pinpoint some things that we can do, to help a little bit.
Please, yes.
But
Yeah.
Before I do that, I want to tell you, Cindy, that you're actually a big liar.
Oh, cut the feed. Someone.
You're a big liar.
Okay. Tell me liar stands for something.
I thought that one would get you.
It got me. Excuse me, we're having technical difficulties.
But the truth is, we're all big liars.
Okay.
At least in our minds, we're all big liars.
Okay.
Sometimes I ask clients, do you believe everything you think? Do you believe everything you think? Then I watch them think for a few minutes, trying to figure out, do I believe everything I think? And I say, I sure hope you don't. I really hope you don't, because your mind is the biggest liar you'll ever know. Oh. Even more than politicians during an election year. Your mind is the biggest liar you'll ever know. Your mind just pretty much lies all the time, really. In psychology, we have a more palatable term, and we call those lies cognitive distortions.
Okay. It is nicer. It sounds a lot nicer.
Alternative facts.
Oh,
Same thing. Same thing. And so there are many of those cognitive distortions. There are a number of them. I'm just going to mention a few here, a couple here. One is emotional reasoning. When you over time think something like, it's a fact that 70,000 plus airplanes, commercial airplanes, and hired airplanes and other privately owned airplanes. There's about 70,000 flights a day in America, and yet you somehow convince yourself that the flight you're on is going to crash. That's emotional reasoning, is what that is. There's another one called disqualifying the positive. Let's say you're in the stands and your kid is playing baseball and he comes up to the plate and he hits a single, and your friend compliments him to you and says, "Man, that was great. Wow, I'm impressed." And you all of a sudden say something like, "Well, if he had swung at the first pitch, I told him to hit the first pitch, the juicy first pitch that comes. If he'd have done that, he would have knocked it out of the park." Well, that's disqualifying the positive. Our minds does that to us all the time. We refuse to look at the 15 things that were good and feel good about it, and look at the one thing that wasn't quite right, and then we're all out of whack. And then there's another one called mind reading, assuming what someone else is thinking about something that you did or didn't do. You're mind reading. You're just assuming you know what they're thinking. They didn't answer the phone. They're probably mad at me. And we do that stuff all day long. there are several cognitive distortions that lie to us all the time. And if we don't manage those, they can lead to stress. If we don't manage those, they can lead to anxiety, and they can lead to depression, because life begins to appear so negative than it really is, because we've accepted lies. As a general rule, for living, we should recognize that our mind lies to us constantly. And then we do what's called restructuring things within our lying mind. It's called restructuring or reframing. That's how we deal with that. Just allow yourself to think for a while without those distortions. Permit yourself to think without those distortions. We'll use what's called Socratic questioning is a real good way to do that. You know, Socrates' method of reasoning, questions that clarify, questions that challenge, you know, whatever it is you're thinking. It's like, why am I thinking that? That's a question. You could use, why am I thinking that? And come up with reasons. And then if those reasons are valid, then they're valid. But if they're not, then adjust to that. Questions like, how much of this am I assuming? Quiz yourself. What proof do I have that it's true? Or is there any proof that proves just the opposite, that it's not true? And this is a good one I like to use. What would I say to my friend if he or she were feeling the same way I'm feeling right now? What advice would I give them? So basically, if we can deal with that reframing, then we'll avoid many times stress. And if you avoid the stress, then it's not likely you're going to have any anxiety leading to depression, unless your depression has a different cause.
Right. Yes. Yeah. And I love this, because this idea of we may not know what we're experiencing, but what are things we can do about what we're feeling? And that was one of my questions to you. And I feel like you've answered that which is important. We need solutions, right? We need to know, we can talk about this and what sadness and, or anxiety, stress, depression is. But if we're not talking about what do we do about it, and especially what you just gave, I think is so important. Like, yes, there's times to seek, maybe go start with your primary care doctor, get a therapist, counselor. There may be medication that would help you, but also those things we can do right then in the moment. All we need is ourselves, to be able to. And I was laughing, smile laughing during when you were talking about this, because I was like, oh, so the cognitive distortions he mentioned, I could seriously check, do that. Yep, I do that. Yep. So I am a big liar. I think you were right. But I was like, all those things checked for me. And then the questions, I was like, oh, those are really good. And the one that I wouldn't tell a friend or family member or even a stranger I was somehow helping, I wouldn't tell them usually to do anything that I tend to do. And that's just so wild to me. But the restructure and reframe really hit me specifically because of our audience that listens. Most of them are from the construction industry. And so structure and framework, we get it, right? It's we understand how important those things are and what an absolute disaster it can be if you have to go in and reframe and restructure something, And so I was just thinking about that, the importance of asking ourselves these questions and realizing how important it is to make sure we've got this in the right place. Yeah. That is really good. So go ahead, please.
I don't know. I was going to say some signs that we need help.
Yes, please.
Again, the most basic test of any mood disorder related to severity, how severe it is answering the question, is it interfering with my life?
Mm.
That's the most basic question that should be asked when you're trying to decide whether any mood disorder is one that's at the concerning level. Is it interfering with my life? Does it keep me from doing what I need to do? Or am I doing it more poorly now than I was doing it? Is it sabotaging my relationships? Or is it preventing me from getting a promotion? Is it hindering my communication? Those are the questions that you want to ask in order to determine how serious is this. And you can ask that of yourself, or you can ask it to yourself of an individual that you may be observing. Is it seeming to be interfering with their life? I'm not saying ask them. I'm saying make a determination by observing them. Everybody in their life will experience some level of stress, some level of anxiety, and probably some level of depression. But the question is it interfering with your life, your relationships? Is it interfering with that? And again, the duration and the intensity of it. If Joe is, the life of the Tuesday bowling night session, and all of a sudden he starts coming late, a couple of times, and when he's there, he's less jovial than he has been, and then he's missed a week or two. It's time to be a little bit concerned here. When his demeanor and his activities and his energy levels and his appetite change beyond what has been normal for him, and it stays that way for a week or two, that mood change needs some attention. Mm. Of course, if there is a life event causing the grief, involving death or separation and loss, then more time should be allowed before being overly concerned. But remain vigilant to be sure.
Yeah. You mentioned it about this interfering with whether it's my life or someone else's, but this idea of like it's impacting relationships, work, communications, activities, and then combining that with intensity and duration, and then life events. I think all of those things being super important, to use, I guess, if you're filtering or thinking about it, but this being able to just ask that simple question, is this impacting, interfering with my life, right? With what I'm doing, with how I'm doing it. And I think you kind of started to talk about this, I believe, as well, really, but just this idea of, okay, so our listeners are hopefully applying this to themselves. That's what I would want. First of all, is that we're hearing about this, we're learning something to apply to us, but then we're constantly interacting with other people, be it, obviously we've got family and friend circles, and we've got our work community. So just thinking like if we're on the job site, in the classroom, whatever, you mentioned don't ask, you're not asking the person, you're asking yourself, is there a change in them? But how are we more helpful when we either know someone's dealing with difficulty or we suspect that something's going on? We don't want to be invasive. We don't want to make them uncomfortable. Yeah.
What I said about asking that was specifically for that. Now there comes a place when there should be a little bit of inquisition, perhaps. But the way we can help, people we work with, or people that we're in school with, or people we live with, or people we anything with, the way we can help, is to first classify what you think you see in your own mind. Classify what you think it is that you're seeing. Does it appear to be interfering with their life? That's probably at the very top of the list. Classify whatever it is you think is going on by asking the question of yourself, does it appear to be interfering with their life? Is it sabotaging relationships? Is it preventing them from advancement? Has it changed their willingness or their ability to communicate effectively. You do that within yourself to get to make a decision as to where you think this person that seems to be suffering might be. What you can do then is, and this is in just passing, you don't become super therapist and then all of a sudden come to the rescue. This is just in passing. You ask open-ended questions, the kinds of questions that really you'll ask questions that most people would ask, except you're asking them because you're more intelligent about it, those questions now, and you're looking for something when you ask them. But you're not going to say, hey, how's it going? And when knowing they're just going to say good, and that's it. No, it's not going to be like that. In passing, you're going to ask some open-ended questions, but then listen for clues and watch body language. Not just one time, but over a short period of time. Ask some questions. You ask stuff like, how's life treating you? How's life treating you? Stuff like, what keeps you busy these days? This is not a one-time thing. You're going to ask this, not questions that can be answered yes, no, good, bad. No, that's not, you're not going to find out anything. But keep in mind that short-term stress, anxiety, and slight depression, like tendencies, are normal. They're normal. Mm-hmm. So the other thing that I would tell folk that there's a good thing to do, some people not comfortable with this, but I think it's a good thing to do some amount of self-disclosure on the front end. When you self-disclose, and I'm not talking about telling every secret you got, but it could be, I had a really tough day today. How things going for you? I had a really tough day today. How things going for you? Because all you're trying to do is give the person whom you suspect might be going through something an opportunity, to feel comfortable enough to say something. That's basically what you're doing. And then, of course, what you learned from a couple or a few conversations is much more than you'll learn from mere observance. And when you do learn, whatever you do learn, then you have choices as to what to do with it based upon what it is. If it's very, very serious, then you approach it in a very serious way. Some people can be at a suicidal stage and you see them every day. You see them every day. And they could be at a place of having suicide ideation that is just a step away from ending their life. So what you learn in these conversations, if it's at that state, then you should take it seriously enough to encourage them to do certain things, or maybe you'll have to do certain things that may not be that comfortable at that point. But then it may not be to that level. It just may be building a relationship and noticing that maybe you need to pay more attention to them, check on them, give them a call, invite them to go out, have some fun. It may just be at that level. But either way, if you can do some self-disclosure and can ask open-ended questions, you'll arrive at that place sooner.
Absolutely. Like all of it. I mean, again, I've been taking notes, which I tend to do when you speak, but the open-ended, the self-disclosure, I think all of that is just so important. Because a lot of times we do say, how you doing? And nobody's asking. In a lot of those situations, we really don't want to know. We just want you to say, good, how are you? I'm good. And there's the conversation, I want to point something out before we end specifically about suicide. Because you were talking about that person that might be, one thing is they might be at this place, and because you asked, these questions and you showed interest, right? You never know the difference that can make. But more than that, I want to make sure people understand, don't ever feel, I guess, guilt or blame if someone does, choose to die by suicide and you didn't see it. Like, I don't ever want someone to take that on. Like, I worked with them every day. I should have known. They were in my classroom. I should have known. I want to make sure that's never on someone's heart, and in their mind.
Right. That reminds me of, man, I'll tell you, if anything stuck with me during my years of learning to be a therapist, and this was in probably around 1980. That's how long ago it was that I was in class. The class was crisis intervention class. And my professor, Dr. Rod Fowler, he said this. My professor was actually the head of the SWAT team for the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we were talking about suicide intervention. We were talking about if you ever have to talk anybody out of killing themselves. And since that time, I have had to do that. And it came to me then. But what he said to our class was, if you decide to take credit after you talk that guy off the bridge, then you have to take the blame if he jumps. And so that has stuck with me and stuck with me and stuck with me. I don't, in the situation I'm there, but I'm not going to take the credit. If he or she decide to continue to live, and I'm not going to accept the blame if they decide otherwise.
Right. Yeah. And I just, as we were talking, I thought that was an important thing to note, because I think we can have that situation come up. So I appreciate you sharing such a practical example to help us understand. So anything, as we're kind of wrapping up, anything else that you think would be important to share before we close out?
I guess, man, there's so many things to choose from. I guess I'm going to focus on being there for somebody else. Just being there. Don't be. This is not the time to say, well, I'm the shy type. This is not the time to say, well, I didn't grow up like that. Or, the way we did things was it. No. We are on this planet together, and we are in it together. And I think it's really important that whatever we can offer to somebody, especially when it comes to helping them to be better, to feel better, to live longer, then we don't want to, continue to step back and not step forward to help. I would encourage you to, if there's a situation that you can help, think about it, be prepared with open-ended questions and what you would do in that situation. And then when opportunity presents itself, take that opportunity.
It's perfect because we talk so much about being a brother and sisterhood. We're talking about this effort, that we're all trying to make in our industry to make it a bigger community, more inclusive, a place where people belong. So in all of that, it really just resonates to me with the message, that all of our organizations are giving. And so that it rings true. I think it's part of the mission at this point. So Dr. Charles, I thank you so much. Again, a lot of wisdom coming from experience, and I just appreciate it so much. And we'll be seeing you at NTI, so we'll get to hear even more goodness.
Absolutely, looking forward to it.
Just promise you're coming back on the podcast.
I promise.
Okay. All right. You're not a liar, are you?
Scout's honor.
Okay.
I lie all the time.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. All right. It was so good. I really did take several, maybe 3 pages of notes listening to Dr. Charles. And I would probably do a really terrible job of recapping. I know we talked about different things we can do. We talked about stress, anxiety, depression, different things we can do with each other, like asking open-ended questions and being there, and things we can do even within ourselves, checking our cognitive distortions and asking questions of ourselves. So again, way too much to try to recap. So I would highly recommend going back and listening to bits and pieces, anything that you feel like would be helpful to you. Dr. Charles, thank you so much for joining us again, for being a resource for our industry. I mean, you've proven it over a podcast, an NTI, and now again. Just thank you for reminding us about the importance of taking care of ourselves, of understanding ourselves, of being there for each other, looking at our mental health as something that is critical to a vibrant, healthy life. Just really appreciate that. Huge thanks to you, the listeners. I'm hopeful that this episode was powerful and good for you. But I appreciate you taking the time to join us every time that you do. Remember that we do want to hear from you. If there are things you think we should be discussing, topics that are industry related or otherwise, if you want to join us, just send an email, saywhat, SAYWATT, at electricaltrainingalliance.org. Our next episode will drop in July. Until then, you can stay connected with us through our newsletter, social media, subscribing to the podcast. Stay powered up, take very good care of yourselves, and we will see you next time.
Say what?